the first question we're going to deal with is this one here, because this is the part on your rights to a union. Okay? This is the question we get all the time, but 3 times a week, maybe 2 times a week. Used to have it even more in the past, less now. Can you get fired for being in a union?
Not legally.
That's right. That's right. Here's where I make my regular little joke. Murder is illegal, but people get murdered. You know, it's the point after that happens to deal with it, right? Yeah, well, you know, I think it underlines the fact, though, that it happens. You know, even something as atrocious as murder happens. You can outlaw it, but it still may happen. Does it happen much in our history? No. It happens very, very rarely. And did it happen a lot more in the beginning? Oh, yeah. The first 10 years of our existence was basically one of the big fights was over the right to exist as a labor union. So we organized a union at my company. I was fired. So I'm never the one who tells people, no, you can't be fired for joining a union. Well, because I was fired. But we won. We dealt with it. And does it happen a lot now? I don't see it as much. I see little kinds of harassment and things like that, more against leaders, but to the degree that it once happened, no. I just don't. It's just not there anymore. Why? Well, you know, I think our reputation when people got fired in the past was a proper ferocious response, which actually prevented it later in the future. Another one is companies have gotten used to us. Universities have gotten used to us. We've been around longer. They've been around longer. The relationship is a little bit different than it once was. So that's just the part we deal with right off the bat. Basically, in Japan, the right to a union is in the Constitution, okay? And it gives you 3 rights, okay? So let's look on page 31. Article 28 of the Constitution. The right of workers to organize and bargain and act collectively is guaranteed. That's the Rodo Sange. The 3 rights of labor. The right to organize, the right to collective bargaining, and the right to action or dispute, which means your right to strike and other forms of dispute. You know, I don't know if, in Canada, I know it's not in the Constitution, your right to a union. Does anybody come from a country where your right to a labor union is guaranteed in the basic law of the country?
We don't have a constitution.
You don't have a constitution. You have an unwritten constitution.
Yeah, which means they can interpret it as
any way they want. Yeah, so you know, in that sense, the Japanese constitution is rather progressive. You know, you have a right to join a union, and then there's the constitution. And then after that, underneath it is the trade union law that sort of guides those rights and those kind of things.
We have the right not to belong to a trade union, but we don't have the right to belong to it.
Yes. Aaron?
If the current leaders of this country succeed in pushing through their changes to the Constitution, will these rights still be in there?
I don't know. I've not heard a lot of discussion of getting rid of this. I think their focus right now is on the right to make war, as opposed to the right to getting rid of unions.
They have also made some worrying changes in their proposal has worrying changes in some other things too, though, like the right to assembly and freedom of speech and things like that.
Could be suspended in emergencies.
With very little definition of an emergency, except whenever they decide that it's an emergency.
And there's also things on family that are really reactionary, almost like joint responsibility.
I've not heard of any effort to get rid of the 3 rights of labor. I've not heard that at all from them. Why? I think because then they're already facing an uphill fight in the country over changes to the Constitution that aren't very popular, right? You add this on and you add that to it, and it's going to become much more difficult for them. So, basically, you have the trade union law then that governs that right under the Constitution. So, you know, I don't know if there's a lot to go through with this part here. You you are safe. The law protects you. But the best protection you have is having a strong union in your workplace. People often ask me, the Japanese trade union law, the trade union law in Japan says if the union has one member in a workplace, we have the right to collective bargaining. One person. Yeah, you do have the right to collective bargaining. Are you gonna we do solve things even for one person. We do often solve things for one person. But again, everyone knows this, right? This is not something I'm going to say. People are going to go, oh, really? It is numbers. It's your power. It's how strong you are in the workplace. It's how much willing you are to stand up for your rights to a union and for the demands that you've brought forward to your employer. And that is the right, that last right, the right to dispute. If you're not willing to do that, and often people do start off with, we want to be reasonable. We don't want to make crazy demands on the company. And that's true. There's very few workers who believe that they want to start a union to bankrupt their employer or to create terror in the workplace. That doesn't really. I've not seen that anyways. I'm sure there are some places people that are angry and they do want to fight, but that's not people's basic reason for starting a union, right? So again, if you have demands that you're willing to make and you believe that they're reasonable, then you have to believe that you're willing to fight for those demands. So people do often start, we don't want to cause trouble. It's almost like they have to admit that because someone's going to accuse them of wanting to cause trouble. And people will even go so far as to say, we never want to have a strike. There's not many people that like going on strike. There are not many people that like having to have a dispute. But if you start from the basic position that our union will never have a strike, our union will never fight for our demands, our union will never protect people who get bullied by the employer, then the company will steamroll over your union. You're better not to start in that case, because it would put us in a much more difficult position. So the law gives you the rights to protect your rights. So we talked about before, how you go about resolving an issue. So the company writes in 5 years, or retirement age is 65, or you can't get a pay raise because unlimited term contract workers don't have we can't change your working conditions, or you write in something crazy in someone's contract and give it to them that day and expect them to sign it. As a union, you have the right to make a demand over those things. You can demand about anything that affects your working conditions. The company's answer cannot be, well, you signed, you agreed. But if that was the case, then there'd be no need for a union would be impossible, because basically you can say that about anything. Oh, the working regulations, the workers' rep agreed, the individual labor contract, well, you agreed. But let's face it, people sign that contract not because they agree to every point in the contract. They sign that contract because they want to work. It's an unbalanced relationship. The company says to you, you want a job? Well, I don't like this part. I didn't ask you if you like that part. I asked you, do you want a job or you don't want a job? People gotta eat. They sign the contract. But you still have the right at that point to say, to join with your coworkers and make a demand to ask that to change. So that right, which is in the Constitution, which is protected by the trade union law, you cannot give that right up by signing a contract saying, I've agreed, I will never, we can't ask for changes later on. That part is your right on that basis guaranteed. So if someone asks me often, not in every case, they've added a crazy thing into my contract. What should I do? My answer basically is this: sign the contract, and then make a demand through a labor union to negotiate about that point while your employment is safe. Because you want to save your employment. Now, often Simon mentioned this too, or we'll send a letter saying, Bob Smith only signed this contract because he wants to show his intention to continue working, but he doesn't agree with A, B, and C. that's the way that we let the employer know that, you know, we're going to do something at some point over this. But basically, you make a demand, and you have a right to change whatever you want in your employment contract, as long as you can get an agreement. So basically, in any company, there is your individual labor contract. Then there are the working regulations that are over top. You know, the things in the working regulations are things that you have to follow as an employee. Then, does anybody know what's next?
Laws?
Not yet. Law is the fourth one. One more. The one that trumps the contract, the individual contract, and the working regulations is any agreement made with a trade union. So if you're a union member, and we have an agreement that says you get, you know, 300,000 yen a month to work 2 hours, and your contract says it's 40 hours, well, you get 300,000 yen for 2 hours, because that's what the labor agreement between the union that you're in and the company says. So that trumps anything. So the whole idea of you can't change your contract because you already agreed is nonsense. People sign contracts they want to work. It doesn't mean you give up all your rights to not be able to change any of the conditions. And as an individual, you know, most people, when you sign your contract, they give it to you, most people just say, thanks, boss, and sign. Why? Because in many cases, any kind of peep or I don't like this or is often met with one of two things. Well, then don't work here, or that's fine, they don't like that, so you're gonna sign or what? They really don't care that you don't like that. So joining a union and negotiating is probably the best guarantee you have. On page 33, there are some things here that I do want to go through with you, and they're called what unfair labor practices are in Japan. Okay, this is not the company being unfair or bad. This is very specific things about your rights to a trade union. Before we go any further, only a company in Japan can be guilty of an unfair labor practice in terms of union-company relations. A union cannot commit an unfair labor practice, okay? Only a company can do this. So, you know, we often get employers saying, well, what the union is doing is also an unfair labor practice. It's not, because we cannot commit unfair labor practices. It's not possible, technically under the law. But basically a company is banned clearly from doing these four things that are mentioned here, okay? So firing someone or treating them disadvantageously because they're in a union. Now I know a lot of people tell me, yeah, but what they're gonna do is they're just gonna say because I was a bad guy, or you know, they cut my wage because I didn't perform well, and that's how they're gonna get around the law. Well, the law, you know, the law is not always 100% on our side, but it's not always 100% against us either in that sense, right? You know, people do understand, you know, the panel, the Labor Commission does see things, judges see things, you know, unions see things. You know, you may say this person's a terrible person. I'll tell you, when I got fired, the students also made a group actually to fight against my dismissal. And they had a meeting with the company, and the company said, he is the worst worker in all of Kansai. And one of my private students who was in the group stood up and goes, but when I joined, you said he was one of the best teachers there are. So can I get my money back? So of course companies are going to say, yeah, this person is terrible and this person has done bad things. That doesn't mean as a union member you have a right to do bad things. It means that you are protected though against companies abusively going after you, and the main reason being that you're in the union.
So, hypothetically, asking for a friend, if theoretically you joined a union and then the next week were informed that your contract would not be renewed, hypothetically, is that whack?
Yeah, it's clear, isn't it? It's clear. You know, unless there's some reason, like, and we've had this before, where coincidence happens, where, you know, someone's done something bad, they join the union, we inform the company, and then before they even see the notice, and 30 minutes later, or even a couple of days later, they say, we're not renewing the contract. Well, why? Well, what was it? Was it because he punched that student in the head 2 weeks ago, or is it because he joined the union? Well, then that's the discussion, that's the argument. Why was it for? But basically, you can't go after, you can't go after someone because they joined the union. It's their right to join the union. What will defend you the most is your coworkers, your colleagues, the other union members at other companies, then the law. Then the laws will help after that. But trying to make, sticking with the idea that one person has a right to a union ain't gonna get you very far. You need to talk to your coworkers, you need to try to organize a union, you need to have numbers. The company has a different kind of power. Your power is numbers. So that, that's just traditional stuff. There's nothing I can teach you about that. That already is something that everyone knows. Another thing a company cannot do, they cannot refuse collective bargaining. They can't say, yeah, but he already agreed to that in the contract, so we're not. They can't do that. They can't make, this refusal also deals with unnecessary delay, or, yeah, we'll have collective bargaining with you next year. Or we'll have collective bargaining with you in Hokkaido. We'll do this, but we can't do it right now. No, it gets in the way of, that's also refusing. Refusing is also this. The duty to collective bargaining isn't just they have to come to the table, because that would be a ridiculous, way to, they come here and they just say, no, 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 or we'll think about it, we'll think about it, we'll think about it. They have to negotiate in good faith. Well, what is good faith? Well, I guess that's something that you end up in the Labor Commission discussing, what good faith is. Also, reasons. The union wants a pay increase. We want 100 yen an hour. Company says, we got no money. Fair, it's a fair answer. The union at that point would respond, fine, if you don't have the money, but we want to see it. We want to see the records of your financial situation. Oh, we don't have to tell you that. No, they do. They do. And 2 Labor Commission cases that we fought through is very clear about that. Actually, at Osaka Gaigo, Senmon-Gakko, just around this area somewhere here, over there, they told us that they would tell us the financial situation of the school, but not of the educational trust. Because in Tokyo, they're making money with the wheelbarrow over there. No, we said, you gotta tell us, there is no such thing as Osaka Gaigo. Osaka Gaigo itself does not really exist. It's the name of the school. It's not the name of the hojin, of the trust that runs the school. We won't. We went to the Labor Commission. The Labor Commission said, no, you gotta provide the union with AB, because the reason for not providing a pay increase is you don't have the money. So it's not unreasonable for the union to ask for proof of this. And we won in the Labor Commission. The company then, and what happens at the Labor Commission is often, they can stop there, or the employer can appeal to what's called the Central Labor Commission, or can say, oh, the Labor Commission screwed up and we're going to civil court to challenge the Labor Commission. Because it's an administrative ruling, not a civil or criminal proceeding, right? So they go to, so at Osaka Gaigo, they brought it to the Osaka District Court. The Osaka District Court said, no, union's right. Then they brought it to they appealed again to the Superior Court. And they said, the Superior Court said, no, the union's right. And then they tried to go to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court refused to hear it. But again, 3-4 years to do that. That's why winning collective bargaining, even if sometimes you have to make a compromise, makes it easier than going to court or taking something this year that will lead to something better next year. You win in steps. A good example, ECC is just coming a lot up today. At ECC, the contract workers didn't have special paid leave, so funerals, marriage, things like that, right? Our first agreement was they have unpaid special leave. 2 years later, we won an agreement for paid special leave. Took a little bit of time, but we got there. But they're decisions that you make, because unlike at work, under your boss where you don't have a say in things, in the union, it's yours. You have that say. You decide at that point, along with advice from people who are experienced and have dealt with things for a long time. But the union is yours. So you make that choice. Are we going to battle it out this year to the death? Or we're going to wait a couple of years? Or this isn't worth it? No, this is worth it. That's a choice that you make, because the union is yours. And if people talk about, often people talk about fairness at work and their company is unfair. I don't know. I don't think you're going to find fairness at work. I think you're going to find fairness in a labor union that you organize with your coworkers. I think you'll find fairness there. Are all employers, am I saying all employers are unreasonable and completely the evil people? No, some are good, some are bad, But at the end of the day, if you really want to be able to change what happens in your workplace, protect yourself against unfairness, well, then a union is the answer. It'd be nice if the world was reasonable, wouldn't it? That we would sit down with each other and we would explain, and then, or there was always a third party who would say, okay, this side is right. Doesn't always exist, right? It really comes down to, a lot of times it does come down to, that simple math, that you take what you're strong enough to take, and they hold on to what they're strong enough to hold on to. It would be nice if it wasn't that way, but I don't see it. I don't see the situation where it's not usually that way. Some employers are reasonable, and you sit down, we solve grievances, we fix problems, in many cases. Why? Because they have experience with us and they know what fighting is. And they realize that even fighting for them every time is tiring. It doesn't mean that they suddenly became these reasonable people. It means that they've gone through their experience. They know that solving problems, even on their end sometimes, is better. They make decisions too. This is not worth a war. This is worth a small fight. This is worth a big fight. This is not worth fighting over. They make those decisions too. And people are sometimes shocked when they go to collective bargaining, and they tell us, they say, they're shocked because before collective bargaining, they're used to a relationship when they talk to their employer that this is the discussion, and this is the way they're spoken to. And they get into collective bargaining, and they're shocked that the company actually is saying things that even go against what they were told individually. Because now the employer does have sort of a legal obligation to actually be truthful and try to be honest. So people are even shocked on that level. I think people are also shocked that the employer gets talked back to at collective bargaining, which they're not used to, because at work you talk back. That's right. You may get it in the neck, right? In collective bargaining, no. You have rights in collective bargaining. So, and the point of collective bargaining is to have a discussion like this. That's the point. That's what the law says. And to sign collective agreements, not just to go there and, okay, we'll think about it. The law says very clearly, the point of the trade union law is for unions and companies to sign collective agreements. That's what it says. So just going and being nice and sort of listening collective bargaining, that is not the duty to hold collective bargaining. The other one is controller interference in a union. Well, I don't know if that's straightforward or not. Let me give you an example. I'll give you ECC again. ECC gives the union a rent subsidy to the ECC branch. The rent subsidy is 50,000 yen a month. That's very normal here, because often companies provide unions with offices on the premises. Now, we have an agreement with the ECC that we have an office on the premises. They argue that we have no room on the premises. So the ECC branch rents an office, which is our office, and they get a rent subsidy. That is completely allowed under the trade union law. Another example is the company will pay for the union's full-time official. That is not allowed. The company will pay for beer and pizza. That's not allowed. Why? Because there's also a lot of history of companies setting up a secondary union, and they treat the other union very nice, and they treat this union not very nice to drive people into the other union, the weaker union in this case, right? So they can't interfere with your activity. You want to organize a union? They cannot say, oh, you can't organize a union. You can't organize a union. You cannot give your coworkers a leaflet about the union. Our basic answer to that is this. If you're at work, even if you're on the clock, and you ain't bugging anybody and preventing them from working, and that other person is not working, then you have a complete right to give them something. Now, would I say that if the company came to you and said, don't do that you said, screw you? No, I would say, don't do it and call the union, and then we can work something out. That's the point of negotiation and bargaining, right? Not to have to fight things out on your own, that you do it together as a group. So basically, they can't stop the union from its own activities. So even things like trying to prevent the union from publishing things or writing things on their website. Last week at Morris Brothers, we had an individual mediation session through the Labor Bureau in Kyogo, and it's an individual, right? We went there to help the member, right? Because language issue and things like that. But Morris Brothers said, if we want the union to take down everything off your website about Morris Brothers. Well, no, they can't do that. That's interference in our activity. If they think it's slanderous or go to court, sue us. They can't just tell you. Now, sometimes we do it. Sometimes we want to settle the problem. Yeah, we'll take that shit down. We don't care. Sometimes it's just easier that way. Again, that's the choice that you guys will make, because it'll be your branch and it'll be your employer, and sometimes you got to trade, and it depends what you're willing to trade. That's up to you. But
How does that affect things like non-disclosure agreements as part of the labor agreement?
that's right. So if we make sometimes again, a decision that the union makes and the members make, the companies say, we'll give you this, but don't tell anybody. Sometimes we say, who cares? Sign a non-disclosure agreement and take the benefit. It's not worth it. So we violate that. We violate the agreement, and there can be a penalty for violating that agreement. So, but it's a decision you guys make. You want what's more important? Getting this. So at Berlitz, we have a very good agreement that deals with how part-time teachers get their lessons. And that's as far as I can say, because we have a non-disclosure agreement with Berlitz. But if all the non-union members left the room, all the union members, even if they don't work at Berlitz, because we are an amalgamated union, we're a union based on our industry, we'd tell you all. Depends who the third party is. The other day they were accused at Berlitz they were talking about it in the teacher's room, and the manager came, I heard them. The manager's not a third party. That would be crazy that the manager doesn't know what an agreement says between the company and the union. So, and how would they know they're violating the agreement if they didn't know the agreement existed? They were just being stupid.
Just to be clear on that case, when the union signs a non-disclosure agreement, then they're signing on behalf of every member of the union?
Yes.
Okay, so if you were to tell us something, in this case about Berlitz, after everybody else left the room kind of thing, then we would be obligated to not disclose that information to anyone outside of the union?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Books.
But we're on Facebook. They're not going to listen to the whole 4 hours of this. Okay. So that sort of control and interference, trying to buy the union elections or, things like that, or paying off officers of the union, that's all covered under that control and interference. And there's another one is too, you go to the Labor Commission, you file a case, and then they do something bad to you. Well, they can't do that. That's banned under the trade union law, and it's on page 35, that right there. So basically, that's the trade union law. Something gets violated. For example, someone gets fired, or someone gets treated badly because they're in the union, or the company won't negotiate in good faith. then you decide, how strong are you? Can you fight this out on your own? Is it a battle that just the union on its own through pressure, through strikes and activity can prevent? Because that's the first choice really, right? The first choice is not the Labor Commission. The first choice is not civil court. The first choice is trying to settle the problem on your own through negotiation, through activity, because court is a pain in the ass and it takes a long time. And it's something that, you know, the Labor Commission, like we said, you know, they go to the Labor Commission, we win, the civil, the district court, the superior court, they try to go to the Supreme Court, you know, 4 years later. So the best answer is trying to settle a problem on your own through a union, negotiation, activity. But then the court is there, the Labor Commission is there, the civil courts are there.
And the right to strike is there.
Well, yes, the right to your activity is the right to strike. You know, every year we take a strike vote as part of our general meeting. That's because if we did do that, every time, you know, one branch wanted to have a strike, like Kindai, if they wanted to have a strike, we'd have to get the whole union together to vote on it, right? This way here, the executive committee has the right to give permission for a strike when a branch decides to have a strike. Branch votes to go on strike, right? So why do we do that? It's because without that right, and we go back down to the beginning that I started at, people say, well, I don't want to fight with my company, I don't want to be unreasonable, and I don't want to have to go on strike. Nobody wants to have to go on strike. You lose money when you go on strike, right? It's much easier to win things in negotiation. You're actually much more powerful if you can show that you can take stuff just in negotiation to a certain extent. But that right to strike, if you give that up, or if we ever lost that vote once a year, if it ever came back that the members said, no, for a year the union has no right to strike, they would come hunting for us at that point, because they know that other than court, what are we going to do? You know, complain. So that right is really important to protect and to guarantee that it's always there. So, you know, a lot of people, they think, oh, that group is being unreasonable because they want to go on strike, or you don't know that until you are in that workplace and you know people have to deal with things. You know, it's easy to say, oh, they're unreasonable, they're always on strike. You know, our ECC branch can be accused of that. They're on strike every year. Well, because they deal with a certain amount of unreasonableness in that workplace, and with a union of 100 people, they figure sometimes they'll straighten that unreasonableness out all on their own, and often it works. So that is a very important right to guarantee for people. And I'm going to leave you there unless you got a question.